Hey, I want to explain just on the front end what we're going to do today to put this message and this whole service in context. So I think it was 2 summers ago, I had the opportunity to go to the City Museum in St. Louis. Just for reference, has anyone been to the City Museum in St. Louis? Yes, it is a delightful place. It is like a 12-story adult playground. Like, it is just absolutely amazing. So you climb, like, I have never sweat so much in my life. And I went there like 2 years ago. And so we're there with our kids and we're climbing all over the place. And they've got like this, like, I don't think it's like a 12-story slide that you go down, which was, I'm not going to even attempt to hide my juvenile excitement. It was amazing. Just remember, like, it was just the best. And so we go through all this different stuff, and it's just like, kids are there, kids are going everywhere. It's not really about the kids. I was there for me. I'm not going to lie. Like, where are we going? I don't know. I'm going back to the slide. Like, they're too scared to go that way. You watch them. I'm going to the slide. That's fine. And so, just crawling all around all these different places. And so there's all these adults who are with us, and we're like, oh, Mayor, we're skinning our knees. That feels good, like, as an adult, to like skin your knee. You're like, oh yeah, I'm back. I'm a kid again. This is awesome. And so we're going through all this different stuff. And there's this one spot that's the caves. We're like, all right, so the whole group, we're like, all right, let's go down to the caves. So we get ready. We're going into the caves. And I start crawling through the cave, and I'm like, ooh. This is like, I was like, I feel claustrophobic. I feel a little scared. Like, when it was cave, I thought it was like fun theme park type cave. These are like built to be like real caves. And so we're going through these different things and going throughout all. And then one of the people in our group, they got stuck, which is not what you want. Like, I'm a kid. And they're like, oh no, I'm an adult. That's right. I'm stuck in the cave. And it was like this awkward spot in the cave. So what you were supposed to do is you were supposed to like turn around backwards. This is going to be really awkward for me, but we'll keep going. You're supposed to turn around backwards and then like kind of crawl up. And so there's a cave here because you had to go up and then bend that way. And they didn't go that way. They went forward. And so when they had to bend back, your spine doesn't bend that way. I'm not a chiropractor, but I know that. And so they got there, and they were just completely locked in. There was nowhere they could go. They couldn't go back because they were too far in. They couldn't turn around. And so they're like, that's like that too. They're like, I think I'm stuck. Oh, you're stuck. Like, you are absolutely stuck. And so they needed a group of people to come around to grab their feet, to kind of grease up their body a little bit, and to pull them out of the cave because they had gotten stuck. Now, I tell you all that to tell you this, is that's what today is. Today, some of you got stuck somewhere. It wasn't necessarily a cave, but you got stuck. And so how I want you to see this message is this is me grabbing your feet, trying to pull you a little bit out of the cave. Now, I just want you to know, you can fight me, and you can stay right there, and that's entirely up to you, okay? But I want you to know that's what we're going to attempt to do is for some of you who have gotten stuck somewhere to help you find your way out of it. And earlier you saw Marty's story, and I think this is and we're going to show some other stories throughout the series next week. I'm really excited for the story that you're going to be able to see and be a part of. But I think one of the problems with sharing stories on forgiveness on a Sunday morning like this is it just looks so nice and neat. Like I remember the first time I watched it, and she's like, so I did this, and I wrote letters to inmates, and then I started seeing people on death row, and I developed this great relationship with this man who was going to be executed, who found faith. And she like just shares all that, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like that's amazing. How do you do that? Like, I can't just like jump in and do that immediately. Like, and it just feels like so neat and so tidy. And anytime we talk about forgiveness, especially when it's shared on video, it just feels so like neat and tidy and so simple, and it's all put together and it's not messy. And it just feels so perfect in those moments. And then we get into our own lives and it's not like that. Any amens? There you go. It's not like that. And you go through the difficulties of relationships and circumstances and all those other things, and it's just not neat and tidy. And so you may hear like someone on stage with a microphone say something like, hey, we're going to talk about forgiveness, and it's going to sound really formulaic and really simple, and it's not going to be when we actually get into our lives. And so here's the thing that I want you to hear before we go any further. If we had the opportunity to sit down and you had the chance to tell your entire story of all the things that had happened and all the things that they had done and all the things that they had said and how they shouldn't have left or they should have stayed or they shouldn't have said this or they shouldn't have made that decision or they should have known better or they should have done it differently. If you had the chance to share that entire story, I want to tell you at the end of the day, my response would be, I get it. And I think that's important to understand because so often when it comes to the nature of our conversations on our past hurts, on the things that have scarred us, on the things that have wounded us, the primary thing that we initially hear is someone go, get over it. You need to move past it. And I think first we got to pause for a second and we just need to acknowledge, hey, I get it. Your behavior, your reaction is understandable. It makes sense. It makes sense that you feel the way that you do. Now, there's some things in our lives that we should probably get over, right? There's some things that, there's some minor things that have taken place that probably shouldn't shape us quite as much as they have. There's a guy in college, I'm not going to name his name in case if any of you happen to know him or be related to him. I don't think you are, but I just never really want to take that chance. But I was standing in line in the cafeteria one day, and this guy went to move from the back of the line to the front of the line, formerly known as cutting. Now, I have a high justice meter within me. You don't cut, you don't cheat, you don't cheat in games unless if it's Uno. You can cheat in Uno, that's kind of how I play it. But other than that, you don't cut, you don't play Uno with me. I guess that's the submessage. Someone asked me one time, how do you cheat in Uno? I was like, well, you just when you say you're putting one card down, you just put your entire deck and no one notices. Blue 7. I'm out. So this guy's moving from the back of the line to the front of the line, and he attempts to move between me and the person behind me, and he wasn't very graceful, and he's a large man, and so as he tried to move between me and the person behind me, his big foot kicked me right in the calf, so much so that it actually dropped me to a knee. He kicked me that hard, and he didn't even say he was sorry. No one's outraged. I mean, come on, guys. This is and so for years, anytime someone would bring I'm going out with so-and-so, I'd be like, I can't stand that guy. Why? He's so nice. You don't understand. He cut and he kicked me and he didn't say he was sorry. That is not okay. So there's some things like that we probably should just get over. There's some things that take place and go, oh, maybe you're reading too much in that. You're taking that a little too seriously. You need to get over that. But there are other things that take place in our lives that are more serious, that are more difficult, that are more hard. And if we have those opportunities to actually share our stories, it's important to acknowledge that the feelings that we feel are understandable. That the bitterness or the resentment that comes within us, that they're justified, that they make sense, that it's a reasonable reaction to have that resentment within our hearts. And it's within that context when most of the world just tells us to, hey, just get over it, just move past it, it's fine. That Scripture is actually one of the few voices that speaks sanely to our pain and difficulty. So if you have your Bible, we're going to be in Jeremiah chapter 17. And you can either do that personal Bible, use the one in the pew in front of you. That's our gift to you if you don't have one. Or follow along online at bcnazarene.org/gatherings. And I love this passage because it gives voice to exactly how we feel whenever hardship comes our way, when there are scars, when there are wounds, when there are hurts in our past. And when we have all those different things, and for some of us, the thing that we just most want to do is just to explain it to someone and to have someone return in response. And instead of trying to offer advice, or instead of trying to talk us out of it, or instead of making light of it, for someone to just say, I get it. I get it. I get why you feel the way that you do. And this is where I love where this passage speaks so soundly to that. This is what it says in verse 5 of Jeremiah chapter 17. It says, this is what the Lord says, cursed are those who put their trust in mere humans. Cursed. Now, just to make sure we're on the same page, this is not like a Harry Potter type curse, okay? It's not magic. That's not what they're talking about. What the writer is saying is those who put their trust in people are going to experience difficulty and hardship. And have you ever had those moments where you got burned and you knew it was coming, and yet somehow in the moment you weren't prepared for it? Like, and you just think afterwards and you just go, I knew better. I knew I shouldn't have trusted them. I knew I shouldn't have shared that with them. And you get in this moment where you go, of course that's what happened. I had a situation, just to make sure you understand that I'm not talking about this simply from a scholarly perspective or an academic perspective. This is very personal to me, and I'm not going to give you all the details because the details of the story are not what's important. It's the important thing within all of this conversation is how it affects us and what it makes us feel. But when I was in college, I had someone within ministry who I very much looked up to, who was very much a mentor and a model for me in different spots, who through circumstances that aren't important, lost their position within ministry, that it was taken from them. And why it happened and how it happened and when it happened are not the important details for our understanding today. But for me, this was a devastating blow because this was someone who had been a model and a mentor and a friend for me. And every time I walked past their office when I was walking through the church, they were someone who I looked up to. And for me, in many ways, that I was proud that I was in a relationship with them because I viewed them as a very, very significant, important person. And then all of a sudden, in a moment, they had lost their position. And then what happened after that was the thing that was even harder. Is because, like when anything different happens within a church, there's dissension. And it's easy within churches and faith communities because we get so tight and relationships get so close for differences of opinion and disagreements to bubble up on the surface and for different factions to be created. And so this is what happened, to make a long story very short, is there were people who were upset about what had happened, and they began talking about the people who had made those decisions. And then where it culminated and intersected with my own life is while I'm in college, I began getting calls from board members and from my former Sunday school teachers giving horrific things that other people were saying, trying to push them aside, trying to cast them in a negative light. And this is what that created. If you can't resonate with that, if I could just make it real clearly, the people who I had looked up to my entire life, the people who had given me wisdom and guidance and advice and direction at every significant juncture of my existence, all of a sudden I saw the worst of their character. And all of a sudden I saw the worst of them. And it was this moment where I did not just feel let down by what had happened. I was mad at everyone who was there because I felt like in a moment they had all let me down. And these people who I had thought were these impeccable models of faith, these people who I had looked at for my entire life as pillars of what it looks like to follow Jesus, all of a sudden I saw all the ugliness and all the selfishness and all the bitterness come out on the surface. And what it did within me is the most important thing for me to be mindful of. Not the circumstances of what happened, not how it took place, because in that moment, I felt cursed that I had put my trust in other people. I felt completely let down by those who I had looked to my entire life. And that's what Jeremiah says. When he starts, he goes, cursed are those who put their trust in mere humans. There should be a part of us that doesn't hear that as like a negative prophecy or a negative omen, but we should just look at that and go, yeah, that's right. I've been there. I've felt that. I've experienced that exact same situation. And he spells it out so clearly because cursed are those who put their trust in mere humans. He says they're going to let you down. And then he describes them. This is what he says in Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 6. He says, they are like stunted shrubs in the desert. With no hope for the future, they will live in the barren wilderness in an uninhabited, salty land. Do you like that? He's using the terminology before it was cool. He says they are salty. That's what we have. I don't think that's exactly the intended things. But this is where he begins. He says they are like stunted shrubs in the desert. Why don't you turn to your neighbor, call him a stunted shrub. And then we all realize that maybe Jeremiah needs to work on his trash talk. It's like, they're like stunted shrubs, but there's a part of us that wants to go, yeah, that's right, they are. They're stunted shrubs in the desert. That's not exactly the language I was going to use. I've got some other choice words that I use for those people. But sure, stunted shrubs, let's throw that out there. But there's an important thing we need to see about this passage. When he says they are like stunted shrubs in the desert, the context, the subject, has switched. He's no longer talking about those who have done wrong to us. He's talking about those who put their trust in mere humans. So when he says, cursed are those, he's not saying, hey, the people who have done us wrong, they're like stunted shrubs in the desert. He's saying those who put their ultimate trust, not that you shouldn't trust people, just to be clear within that. Like, I don't want to create a complex for all of us that we're like, I can't trust anyone. I must be vigilant with everything. I'm going to go to the store. Are you? Like, that's not the output of that conversation. It took us too far. He says, no. Those who put their ultimate trust in mere humans are like stunted shrubs. And he's talking about us. He's talking about those of us with resentment, with bitterness in our hearts. So what does that mean? Stunted shrubs in the desert. Let's make it a picture. He's saying, hey, you could be like this. That's lovely. He's saying, hey, within difficulty, within hardship, you could blossom and you could grow, but you don't see that in the desert, do you? No, you see this instead. And he says, for those of us who are caught up, who are stuck by the wrongs that have been done to us in the past, that is what we have become. We are stunted shrubs. Now we could have, if we go back to the first one, we could have looked like this. Our lives could have been different, but instead this is what it has become. And this is what is so important to understand within this context. It is what Jeremiah is speaking of here. Is the fact is that sometimes the things that have happened to us within the past, not that they weren't wrong, not that they're not understandable, not that our resentment is not justified. The reality is what has happened is it has made us captive to the scars of our past. It has made us prisoner to the wrongs that have been done to us yesterday. And what happens in that moment is when you are captive to the things that have been done to you in the past, you lose your future. And so Jeremiah, within this perspective that is often forgotten within our world today, he proclaims to people that you need to also look at your future. He doesn't make light of the past. He doesn't try to explain it away. He doesn't give some nice little phrase, get over it, just move past it. No. He says, no, that was wrong. You shouldn't put their trust in mere humans. Bad things will happen when you put your ultimate trust in people. But here's the thing I want you to know, is you weren't meant to be a stunted shrub. You were meant to move forward. Now, for some of us, that idea, when I talk about it, you may go, how? Like, I can't do that. I can't forgive. I can't move through it. I can't make that difference in my life. Like I'm locked into my past. I don't even know what to do to move forward. And so this is what I want to do is I want to show you a story of an event that took place in our actually recent history of the power of forgiveness in our lives in the most difficult of circumstances, with the most vicious of offenses, and how it can help people move forward. Our story, our account takes place in the nation of Rwanda. Rwanda is a small country on the continent of Africa. And the makeup of Rwanda is with two distinct groups. 85% of the people are identified as Hutu. I know that is foreign language to us, but that is how they identify that group of people. 85% are Hutu people. 15% are referred to as Tutsi. Now, I want to be clear, that is T-U-T-S-I, not like the movie with, I can't remember the guy who was in it, called Tootsie. That's an entirely different thing. Bring your brain back to Tootsie. So, 85% are Hutu, 15% are Tutsi. The Tutsi reigned and ruled over Rwanda for the majority of its existence. They established a monarchy that was often harsh to the majority Hutu people. I believe it was in the 1940s, they switched their government, and all of a sudden there was a president who was elected who came from the Hutu majority. Now, you can imagine that when one small group of people have reigned harshly over the entire majority for much of their existence, there is bitterness and there is tension within that relationship. This boiled to the surface. In 1994, the Rwandan president, while he was in a plane, his plane was shot down. There was this great conspiracy and concern as to who had caused it. It was later found out that it came from Hutu extremists who were in the military. So the Hutu people shot down their own president as a way to give a reason to launch an attack on the Tutsi people. Over the next 100 days, between 800,000 and 1 million people in Rwanda were murdered. Now, they were not murdered through sophisticated means of execution. The most common weapon that was used to carry out these acts was a machete, because they were poor and they didn't have much. So over 100 days, this took place. And this was not like, there weren't like two armies that came together. And in fact, the reason why the onslaught, why the genocide actually ended, is there was a very small Tutsi militia that made its way to the capital that ended the onslaught. So it wasn't like two armies faced off against each other and all this took place. It was neighbor to neighbor. It was friend to friend. Like the genocide took place within villages, not on a battlefield. And so as all this took place, after 100 days, between 800,000 and 1 million people were murdered in this very small nation. In the aftermath, over 100,000 children became orphans when this took place. And so as the Tutsi minority became in power again, all of a sudden, like kind of the whole world just kind of waited on the edge of their seat, waiting for them to return the favor. Waiting for them to go, okay, you've tried your worst, now you'll see ours. And to take all the bitterness and all the hurt and all the resentment to use it to lash out at those around them. But they didn't. They didn't. Instead, they had seen all the hurt and all the pain and all the broken relationships and all the lives that were destroyed. And they did something that was absolutely amazing. They put their focus on how they would bring this nation back together. Not because the crimes that had happened in the previous 100 days weren't serious, because they were, and there were consequences for them, and there was discipline as part of that. But because they chose to see that Rwanda had a better future than it had a darker past. And so at first, there were obviously trials that took place for the for the top people, for the orchestrators of the attacks. But they had this incredible dilemma of how do we carry out justice when so many people were involved? Like the backlog of trials that would break their justice and court system entirely. And so they had this question, how do we do this? And so while there were different penalties and disciplines and prison time spelled out for different people, they turned to an ancient form of justice from their own country. The form of justice is referred to as the Gacaca court system. And what would take place within the Gacaca court system is the entire village would gather around a shaded area, a group of trees or something like that, And they would bring the person who had done the offense before the entire village. And this was the model. Is the person who had done the offense, the person who had done wrong, would stand before the entire village and they would apologize. They would confess their crimes. And it was a way for healing to begin. Now, I want you to, this is so important to understand. This is not some distant memory. In 1994, this began taking place. And this country chose to say, hey, we're going to make things better, not through violence, not through bitterness, not through resentment, but through confession and through forgiveness. The photographer, Jeremy Cowart, went years later, and he wanted to see if the trials, if these village communal tribal system, if it actually had an impact, if it did the good that they sought for it to do originally. And he began taking pictures of people with those who had committed these terrible acts against them. I want to show you 5 of them. This first picture, the man on the left fled his home in 1994 after receiving a death threat, only to return shortly to find his wife and 3 children already dead. His neighbor and friend pictured on the right was one of the culprits in the murder for which he spent 7 years in prison. Racked with guilt throughout his incarceration, he begged him for forgiveness and later started a community reconciliation organization. Today, the 2 men have become friends, and their families frequently spend time together. In this next picture, the woman on the left never thought she would forgive their close family friend on the right who brutally beat her father to death. 14 years after the murder, they agreed to attend a healing and reconciliation workshop together. A year later, she publicly forgave him in front of their entire community, saying that her heart had been set free. The one on the right, who was 31, endured years of rage after the family friend that lived in their home killed her mother, 3 siblings, an aunt, and an uncle. During his 7 years in prison, he was impacted by various ministers who taught him about the need to repent and ask for forgiveness. Later, he begged her for pardon, but it took her for more than a year for her to agree. She said, "When I finally forgave, I felt so lighthearted that I cried." Today, the 2 remain friends and help each other with household chores. In this picture, the man on the right locks arms. The man on the left, his name is Innocent. He changed his name after he was forgiven. The man on the left killed the man on the right's older brother during the genocide. They later reconciled while attending the workshop hosted by the As We Forgive Rwandan initiative, and today work together in an agricultural association. They are pictured in the exact spot where the murder took place. And this last one is the one that blew me away. Anasta, who is pictured on the right, is 45. He survived the genocide by hiding in a banana tree while his entire family was chased by a mob into the lake. The lake is pictured there, and drowned. Jean, who's on the left, is the son of the leader of that mob. Although the father fled the country in fear, Jean begged Anasta for forgiveness during the Gacaca trial, and Anasta, out of his Christian faith, forgave them all. Now, I don't share those stories with you to make light in any way of what you have felt, what you've experienced, what you've been through. I don't share it in any way for you to have the feeling, like the point of that is not to go, well, I guess my thing's not that big of a deal. Because it is. Like, it is a big deal. I share those stories with you so that you'll know that even in the most difficult of situation, that moving forward is possible. In that last story that we read, the write-up on it that is posted online is, out of his Christian faith, he forgave them all. And this is what Jeremiah writes, continuing in verse 7. He says, "But blessed are those who trust in the Lord and have made the Lord their hope and confidence." Jeremiah is writing in this moment. He says, no, cursed are those. Difficult circumstances, difficult feelings, difficult times will those experience who put their ultimate trust in mere humans. When you are counting on another person for all of your hope, for all of your security, for all of your emotional well-being, what Jeremiah is writing, he said, they will let you down and you will have scars and baggage because of it. He says, but blessed are those who put their ultimate trust and hope in God. And then he begins to describe it, and have made the Lord their hope and confidence. They're like trees planted along a riverbank with roots that reach deep into the water. Such trees are not bothered by the heat. When life comes and it deals you its worst, it says they're not bothered. They can move forward. Or worried by long months of drought. Their leaves stay green and they never stop producing fruits. Long months of drought is that you become dependent upon the actions of others to move forward in your own life, which is so easy to find. And one of the books that I was reading in preparation for the series, the book is 5 Blind Spots by Stephen Arterburn. Stephen Arterburn is a counselor, and he shares the account of a woman who came up to him after, I believe he had spoken at a conference. A woman came up to him and said, "How do I get my ex-husband to ask for forgiveness?" And he said, "Let's talk." And so she began sharing her story. And her story was this, that as she was growing up, that her father had abandoned her family. And so she knew what it felt like from an early age to be abandoned. And so as she was dating this man, and as it became more and more serious, she told him, "Do not ask me to marry you until you are convinced that you can be faithful to me forever." She gave him the warning. Hey, listen, here's the deal. Not that I don't love you, but do not commit yourself to me until you are sure that you can be completely committed to me. And then what happened is, somewhere within their relationship, he struck up a relationship with another person. He left his wife. He divorced her. She said she spent the first couple years assuming that their marriage was going to crumble and that he'd come crawling back to her. When it became evident that that wasn't going to take place, the one thing that she held on to was, if he says he's sorry, then I can move forward. And what has happened in that moment, I think every single one of us would sit here and we agree, what he did was wrong. Her resentment, her bitterness is justified. And yet, in the exact same moment, she's stuck and she can't move forward. And so in this moment, it's not about making light of the past. It's not about acting as if our scars aren't there. It's about choosing to believe that what God has before me is still good. That where God leads me, when I trust him, when I follow him, is what is best for me. And I have too much in front of me to be completely caught up in the things that have happened behind me. And that while the scars will shape me, they should not hold me. And while my pain will form me in many ways, they should not imprison me. And so that's why Jeremiah writes, he says, cursed are those who put their ultimate trust in mere humans. Blessed are those who trust in God, because heat and drought will not shape their future, because they have put their trust in God. So I want to offer you 2 challenges this morning. And I want you to understand the heart behind the challenge is, I want you to move forward. I want you to be able to live out the entire potential of what you dreamed and imagined that your life would be. And while your story may have up until this point been very, very different than you would have ever written out for yourself, that does not mean that God does not still have good things ahead of you. And so my first challenge for you is this, is to begin moving towards forgiveness. Whatever that looks like, whatever that offense is. To maybe see in a moment that my future is still before me. And while I can't change what has happened to me in my past, I do shift my perspective and my attitude about what takes place ahead of me. To begin moving towards forgiveness. And that's coupled with the second challenge, because I believe the first step towards forgiveness is not actually a step towards reconciliation. I believe the first step that we take towards forgiveness is actually a step towards Jesus. And it's understanding that my ultimate trust is not in those around me. As wonderful and as nice as the people sitting next to you, I'm sure they are. It's to understand that my ultimate trust is in a God who saves. And a God whose love is reckless. Because it did not count the cost. It was not worried about risk reward when he came to save me. And so let me pray for us. Father, my prayer this morning is for the person when we talk forgiveness, when we say reconciliation. It's not an idea, it's not a concept, it's a person, it's a face, it's an event, it's a story, it's a situation. And with all the bitterness fresh on the surface and with all the resentment right there in their hearts, Father, my prayer this morning is that they would see that you still have life ahead of them. That although death may have defined their past, that your life sits before them and they can choose that today to move forward, to move closer to you. That as we move closer to forgiveness, our step is towards faith, and that we would find within you all the goodness, all the kindness that we have ever desired. And I pray all this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.